The courtroom was alive with whispers and murmuring voices like a pot of water just about to boil. People shifted uncomfortably in their seats, some leaning forward eagerly, while others glanced around nervously, trying to gauge the mood. Wasn't every day that such a high-profile inheritance dispute made its way into this small-town courthouse. The air felt heavy, thick with anticipation, as if everyone knew something big was about to happen. At the center of it all sat Mr. Richard Hawthorne, a man who commanded attention wherever he went. Dressed impeccably in an expensive suit, his polished shoes gleaming under the fluorescent lights, Richard looked every bit the successful businessman he claimed to be. His confident posture and calm demeanor seemed unshakable, even as accusations swirled around him. To most people in the room, he appeared untouchable, a pillar of respectability and wealth. But there were cracks beneath the surface, though no one could see them yet. Across the aisle, sitting quietly but rigidly, was Emily Thompson. She couldn't have looked more different from her uncle. Her clothes were simple, almost plain, and her hands trembled slightly as she clutched a worn leather bag on her lap. Unlike Richard, who exuded confidence, Emily radiated nervous energy. She kept glancing toward the judge's bench, then down at her notes, as if rehearsing what she might say when the time came. Yet despite her obvious anxiety, there was a flicker of determination in her eyes, a quiet resolve that hinted she wasn't going to back down without a fight. This case wasn't just about money, it was deeply personal. After Emily's mother passed away unexpectedly, Richard had taken control of her estate, claiming that his sister had left everything to him in her will. According to him, it was her dying wish that he manage the family fortune and ensure its legacy. But Emily believed otherwise. She insisted her mother would never have excluded her own daughter entirely. For months, Emily had struggled to piece together evidence to prove her side of the story, often working late into the night after long shifts at her part-time job. With no lawyer to represent her, she simply couldn't afford one. She had prepared her case alone, relying on scraps of information and fragments of memories. As the proceedings began, the atmosphere grew even tenser. Richard's lawyer stood up first, presenting his client's version of events with practiced ease. He spoke eloquently, painting Richard as a devoted brother who had always put his family first. "My client has done nothing but honor his late sister's wishes," the lawyer declared, his voice steady and authoritative. "He seeks only to preserve the integrity of her legacy." The judge listened carefully, nodding occasionally as the arguments unfolded. The courtroom fell silent whenever Richard himself took the stand. His testimony was smooth, calculated, and utterly convincing. He spoke fondly of his sister, recalling childhood memories and moments of shared joy. His words dripped with sincerity, and many in the audience found themselves nodding along, swayed by his charm. Even the judge seemed impressed, jotting down notes as Richard wrapped up his statement. But Emily wasn't fooled. As she sat there listening to her uncle spin his tale, anger bubbled inside her. Every word out of his mouth felt like another lie piled onto the mountain of deceit she'd endured for months. Her heart raced and she clenched her fists tightly, willing herself to stay calm. This wasn't the time to lose control. She needed to wait for the right moment, the perfect opportunity to expose the truth. Finally, it came. Just as Richard finished speaking, Emily couldn't hold back any longer. Without thinking twice, she shot up from her seat, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. The sudden movement startled everyone, and all eyes turned to her. Ignoring the gasps and murmurs rippling through the crowd, she blurted out, "Your Honor, my uncle is lying." For a brief moment, the entire courtroom froze. Even the judge paused mid-sentence, his pen hovering over his notepad. Richard's face darkened instantly, his jaw tightening as he stared daggers at his niece. A few members of the audience exchanged wide-eyed glances, unsure whether to feel shocked or intrigued. No one expected such a bold interruption, especially not from someone as seemingly timid as Emily. "Miss Thompson," the judge said sternly, his voice cutting through the tension like a knife. "You are out of order. Please sit down and wait your turn." But Emily didn't budge. Instead, she took a deep breath, steadying herself before continuing. "I know I shouldn't interrupt, Your Honor, but I need to say this now. My uncle isn't telling the truth, and I have proof." Her voice wavered slightly, betraying her nerves, but she pushed forward anyway. "If you'll let me show you, you'll understand why this can't wait." The judge hesitated, clearly torn between maintaining order and satisfying his curiosity. After a long pause, he sighed and gestured for her to continue. "Very well," he said. "But make it quick, Miss Thompson. And remember, anything you say must be relevant." Emily nodded, her pulse pounding in her ears as she reached into her bag. She pulled out a folded piece of paper and held it up for everyone to see. "This," she announced, her voice growing stronger with each word, "is proof that my uncle forged my mother's signature on documents claiming she wanted him to inherit everything. He's been lying to everyone, including this court, and I won't let him get away with it." The room erupted into chaos. Reporters scribbled furiously in their notebooks, spectators whispered excitedly to one another, and Richard's lawyers scrambled to object. But Emily stood tall, refusing to back down. For the first time since the trial began, the spotlight shifted away from Richard and onto her. And though she still had a long road ahead, she knew she'd taken the first step toward uncovering the truth. The courtroom erupted into a frenzy of whispers and murmurs as Emily's bold declaration hung in the air. Her voice, though trembling, had cut through the room like a sharp blade, leaving everyone stunned. The judge, who had been leaning back in his chair with an expression of mild disinterest, now sat upright, his eyes narrowing as he studied Emily intently. Even Richard, who had appeared so composed just moments ago, looked visibly shaken. His face flushed red, and for the first time since the trial began, his confident mask slipped, revealing a flicker of unease. "Miss Thompson," the judge said firmly, raising his hand to silence the growing commotion in the room. "You've made a very serious accusation. I'll remind you that this is a court of law, not a stage for dramatics. If you have evidence to support your claim, present it now. Otherwise, I will have no choice but to hold you in contempt." Emily swallowed hard, her hands shaking as she clutched the folded piece of paper tightly. She knew this was her moment. Her one chance to make the truth heard. Taking a deep breath, she stepped forward cautiously, her heart pounding in her chest. Every eye in the room was on her, and she could feel the weight of their stares pressing down on her. But she forced herself to focus, reminding herself why she was here, to honor her mother's memory and fight for justice. "This isn't about drama, Your Honor," Emily said, her voice steadier now. "This is about the truth. My uncle has spent months manipulating this case, twisting facts to suit his own greed. He's lied to this court, and I can prove it." With that, she unfolded the piece of paper and held it up for everyone to see. It was a copy of a document bearing her mother's signature, or what was supposed to be her mother's signature. Emily pointed to the signature at the bottom, her finger trembling slightly as she traced its jagged lines. "Look at this signature," she said. "It doesn't match my mother's handwriting. In fact, it looks nothing like it." Richard's lawyer immediately stood up, objecting loudly. "Your Honor, this is absurd. Miss Thompson is clearly trying to derail the proceedings with baseless accusations. There's no credible evidence here, just speculation." But Emily didn't flinch. She turned to face the judge, her expression earnest and determined. "Your Honor, please hear me out. I'm not making wild claims. I have more than just this document. Weeks before my mother passed away, we recorded a video together. She wanted to make sure her wishes were clear, so she spoke directly into the camera and explained exactly how she wanted her estate handled. Half of her assets were supposed to go to charity, and the rest was to be divided among her closest relatives, not handed over entirely to my uncle." A murmur rippled through the courtroom as people exchanged glances, some skeptical, others intrigued. Richard shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his earlier confidence replaced by visible agitation. He leaned over to whisper something to his lawyer, his voice low and urgent, but the damage was already done. The seeds of doubt had been planted, and the judge's interest was piqued. "Miss Thompson," the judge said, his tone softer now but still firm, "if you have this video, I suggest you produce it immediately. However, I must warn you If this turns out to be a fabrication or an attempt to mislead this court, there will be consequences. Emily nodded quickly, her mind racing as she fumbled through her bag again. This time she pulled out a small USB drive, holding it up for everyone to see. "This contains the video I mentioned," she said. "My mother recorded it herself, and it proves beyond any doubt that she never intended for my uncle to inherit everything. Please, Your Honor, let me play it for you." The judge hesitated, glancing toward Richard's side of the courtroom. Richard's lawyer was on his feet again, arguing vehemently against allowing the video to be shown. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular. We haven't had the opportunity to review this so-called evidence, and it could prejudice the case against my client." The judge raised a hand, silencing the lawyer. "Enough," he said sharply. "Miss Thompson has accused Mr. Hawthorne of forgery and deception. If she has evidence to support these claims, it is my duty to consider it. Bailiff, set up the equipment needed to play the video." As the bailiff hurried to comply, the tension in the room reached a fever pitch. Reporters scribbled furiously in their notebooks, while members of the audience craned their necks, eager to catch a glimpse of what would happen next. Richard sat stiffly in his chair, his face pale and drawn. For the first time, he looked vulnerable, like a man caught in a trap of his own making. Finally, the screen flickered to life and the video began to play. Emily's mother appeared on the screen, frail but smiling warmly. Her voice was weak but filled with conviction as she spoke directly to the camera. "If anyone is watching this, it means I'm no longer around," she began. "I wanted to make my wishes absolutely clear because I know how complicated family matters can become after someone passes. Half of my estate should go to charity, the organizations I've supported throughout my life. The other half should be divided equally among my daughter Emily and my siblings. Under no circumstances should Richard receive the entire inheritance. He may try to convince you otherwise, but please don't let him manipulate the situation." The room fell silent as the video ended. No one dared to speak. The gravity of what they had just witnessed was undeniable. Emily's mother had left behind a clear, unambiguous message, one that contradicted Richard's claims entirely. Slowly, all eyes turned to Richard, who sat frozen in his seat, his face a mixture of shock and fury. "Your Honor," Richard's lawyer stammered, struggling to regain control of the narrative. This changes nothing. A video is not definitive proof. Anyone could have edited it or coerced her into saying those things." Emily shook her head, her voice firm as she addressed the court. "That's not true. My mother recorded this video willingly in private without any outside influence. And if that's not enough, I also found a letter she wrote shortly before she died. A letter accusing my uncle of emotional manipulation and coercion. She knew what he was planning, and she tried to protect me." With that, Emily produced yet another piece of evidence. A handwritten letter from her mother detailing Richard's attempts to pressure her into changing her will. The words were heartbreaking, describing how Richard had used guilt and threats to wear her down during her final days. As Emily read excerpts aloud, her voice cracking with emotion, the atmosphere in the courtroom shifted dramatically. What had started as a routine inheritance dispute had transformed into something far more sinister. A tale of betrayal, greed, and abuse of power. By the time Emily finished speaking, the room was eerily quiet. Even Richard's lawyer seemed at a loss for words, his earlier objections reduced to feeble protests. The judge leaned forward, his expression grave as he processed everything he had seen and heard. "Mr. Hawthorne," he said finally, his voice heavy with authority. "Given the evidence presented today, I believe further investigation is warranted. Court is adjourned until tomorrow morning, at which point we will reconvene to discuss these developments in greater detail." As the gavel struck, signaling the end of the session, Emily sank back into her seat, exhausted but relieved. She had taken a huge risk, putting herself in the spotlight and challenging one of the most powerful men in town. But she had done it for her mother, for the woman who had loved her deeply and wanted only the best for her. And now, thanks to her courage, the truth was finally beginning to come to light. The courtroom was abuzz with hushed whispers and murmurs as the recess began. Reporters scrambled to type out updates on their laptops, while spectators exchanged wide-eyed glances, eager to share their thoughts about what they had just witnessed. The atmosphere felt electric, charged with a mix of disbelief, curiosity, and anticipation. It wasn't every day that such explosive revelations came to light in a small-town courthouse, and everyone knew this case was far from over. Emily sat quietly at her table, her hands clasped tightly together in her lap. She tried to steady her breathing, but her mind was racing. For months she had carried the weight of her suspicions alone, unsure if anyone would believe her or take her seriously. Now she had laid everything bare. Her mother's video, the letter, and even the disputed document with the forged signature. But as much as she wanted to feel relief, doubt still lingered in the back of her mind. Would it be enough? Could she truly prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that her uncle had manipulated the situation for his own gain? Across the aisle, Richard looked like a man unraveling before everyone's eyes. Gone was the polished, confident demeanor he had exuded earlier. Instead, he slumped in his chair, his face pale and drawn, his fingers drumming nervously on the edge of the table. His lawyer leaned close, whispering urgently into his ear, but Richard barely responded. He glanced toward Emily occasionally, his expression shifting between anger and something resembling fear. It was clear that the tide was turning against him, and he knew it. Meanwhile, investigators and handwriting experts were already hard at work behind the scenes. They carefully examined the documents Emily had provided, comparing the signatures side by side. One expert peered through a magnifying glass, pointing out subtle differences in stroke patterns and pressure points that suggested foul play. "This doesn't match," he muttered under his breath, jotting down notes. Another team reviewed the video footage frame by frame, ensuring there were no signs of tampering or editing. Their findings would play a crucial role in determining the credibility of Emily's claims. Back in the courtroom, the buzz of conversation grew louder as people speculated about what might happen next. Some sympathized with Emily, seeing her as a brave young woman standing up to a powerful figure who had wronged her. Others remained skeptical, questioning whether she might have fabricated some of the evidence out of bitterness or resentment. A few even whispered about how Richard's reputation in the community might never recover, regardless of the outcome. As the recess dragged on, Emily found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her here. After her mother's sudden death, she had been devastated, not just by the loss itself, but by the way Richard swooped in and took control of everything. At first, she had trusted him, believing he was acting in the family's best interest. But when she discovered discrepancies in the will and realized she had been completely cut out of the inheritance, questions began to gnaw at her. Why would her mother exclude her own daughter? It didn't make sense. Determined to uncover the truth, Emily had spent countless hours digging through her mother's belongings, searching for anything that might shed light on the situation. That's when she found the letter. A heartfelt plea from her mother warning her about Richard's manipulative behavior. Reading those words had been both heartbreaking and infuriating. Her mother had known exactly what Richard was capable of, yet she hadn't lived long enough to stop him. Emily also remembered the night they recorded the video together. Her mother had insisted on doing it, saying she wanted to leave no room for misinterpretation after she was gone. "I don't trust Richard," she had admitted softly, her voice tinged with sadness. "He's always been selfish, and I'm afraid he'll try to twist things once I'm not around to defend myself." At the time, Emily hadn't fully grasped the gravity of her mother's words. Now, sitting in the courtroom surrounded by strangers, she understood all too well. When the judge finally called everyone back to order, the energy in the room shifted dramatically. People hurried to their seats, leaning forward eagerly as the proceedings resumed. The judge wasted no time getting straight to the point. "We've reviewed the evidence presented earlier," he announced, his tone measured but firm. "Based on initial findings, there appear to be significant inconsistencies in the documents submitted by Mr. Hawthorne. Furthermore, the authenticity of the video recording has been confirmed. It has not been altered or edited in any way." A collective gasp rippled through the audience, followed by murmurs of astonishment. Richard's lawyer stood up immediately, attempting to object, but the judge silenced him with a sharp wave of his hand. "Mr. Hawthorne," the judge continued, turning his attention directly to Richard, "you are accused of forging your sister's signature and deliberately misleading this court. Given the severity of these allegations, I must ask you to respond." Richard hesitated, visibly struggling to compose himself. When he finally spoke, his voice lacked its usual confidence. "Your Honor," he said haltingly, "I admit that mistakes may have been made in handling my sister's estate. However, I assure you my intentions were honorable. I only sought to honor her wishes and preserve the family legacy." Emily shook her head in disbelief, her frustration boiling over. "That's not true," she exclaimed, unable to stay silent any longer. "You manipulated her when she was sick and vulnerable. You threatened me into staying quiet because you knew I wouldn't agree with what you were doing." The courtroom erupted into chaos once again as reporters scribbled furiously, and spectators erupted into heated discussions. The judge banged his gavel repeatedly, demanding order. When the commotion finally subsided, he addressed Richard one last time. "Mr. Hawthorne, given the overwhelming evidence against you, I see no choice but to rule in favor of Miss Thompson. Your actions have not only undermined the integrity of this court, but also betrayed the trust of your late sister. Effective immediately, her original wishes, as outlined in the video and supported by additional documentation, will be honored." For Emily, the verdict was a moment of vindication. Tears streamed down her face as she absorbed the magnitude of what had just happened. After months of fighting an uphill battle, she had finally succeeded in exposing the truth. Justice had prevailed, not just for her, but for her mother as well. But the story wasn't over yet. As the courtroom emptied, Emily couldn't help but notice the looks of shame and disappointment directed at Richard. Friends and acquaintances who had once admired him now avoided his gaze, whispering among themselves about his betrayal. Even his own family members seemed distant, their loyalty shaken by his greed. For the first time, Emily allowed herself to feel a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this experience would lead to healing, not just for her but for everyone affected by Richard's actions. As she gathered her belongings and prepared to leave, Emily paused for a moment, staring at the empty seat where her uncle had sat. She felt no joy in his downfall, only a deep sense of sorrow for the choices he had made. But she also felt a renewed determination to move forward, to rebuild her life and honor her mother's memory in the best way possible. As the judge's gavel struck the bench, signaling his decision to honor Emily's mother's original wishes, a heavy silence fell over the courtroom. It was the kind of quiet that follows a storm, a moment when everyone takes a collective breath, trying to process what has just happened. Richard Hawthorne sat frozen in his chair, his face pale and expressionless, as if he couldn't quite believe the words he had just heard. For the first time in the trial, he looked not like the powerful, confident businessman everyone knew, but like a man who had been stripped bare, exposed for the lies and manipulations he had tried so hard to hide. Emily, on the other hand, felt a wave of emotions crash over her. Relief, anger, sadness, and even guilt mingled together in a chaotic swirl inside her chest. She had won, yes, but it didn't feel like a victory. Instead, it felt like closure, a painful but necessary step toward healing. Her eyes drifted toward her uncle, and for a brief moment she almost felt sorry for him. Almost. But then she remembered the countless times he had dismissed her, belittled her, and used his influence to silence her. Those memories hardened her resolve, reminding her why she had fought so hard in the first place. Richard's lawyer stood abruptly, attempting one last desperate attempt to salvage the situation. "Your Honor," he began, his voice tinged with frustration, "we respectfully request additional time to review this evidence and prepare a proper defense. These allegations are serious, and my client deserves due process." The judge, however, was unmoved. "Mr. Hawthorne has had ample opportunity to present his case," he replied sternly. "The evidence against him is overwhelming and corroborated by multiple sources. Any further delay would be unjustified. This court will proceed accordingly." Defeated, Richard slumped back into his chair, his shoulders sagging under the weight of his own actions. His once impeccable suit now seemed wrinkled and ill-fitting, as though it no longer belonged to the man wearing it. He avoided eye contact with everyone in the room, including Emily, whose presence seemed to burn into him like an accusation. For years, he had operated under the assumption that his wealth and status made him untouchable. Now, faced with the consequences of his greed, he realized how wrong he had been. Outside the courtroom, reporters swarmed like bees, eager to capture every detail of the unfolding drama. Cameras flashed, microphones were thrust forward, and questions came rapid fire. "Mr. Hawthorne, do you have any comment on the ruling?" "Emily, how does it feel to win this case? Will there be further legal action?" Richard pushed through the crowd without saying a word, his head bowed low. His usual charm and charisma were nowhere to be seen. Instead, he radiated humiliation and defeat. A few members of the media shouted after him, but he ignored them, climbing into a waiting car and speeding away. It was a stark contrast to the way he had entered the courthouse earlier that day, confident, composed, and surrounded by admirers. Now, those same admirers watched him leave with expressions ranging from shock to disdain. Emily, meanwhile, found herself at the center of attention. Reporters jostled for position, each hoping to get an exclusive interview with the woman who had dared to challenge one of the town's most prominent figures. At first, she hesitated, unsure of what to say or how much to share. But then she thought about her mother, the sacrifices she had made, the kindness she had shown, and the love she had poured into their family. Drawing strength from those memories, Emily stepped forward, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. "I didn't do this for attention or revenge," she began, her words cutting through the noise like a beacon of clarity. "I did it because my mother deserved better. She worked hard her entire life to build something meaningful, to create a legacy that could help others. And I wasn't going to let anyone take that away from her. This wasn't just about money. It was about truth and justice. That's all I ever wanted." Her statement sent ripples through the crowd. Some nodded approvingly, while others scribbled furiously in their notebooks, capturing every word. For many, Emily's courage served as a reminder that even the most daunting battles can be won with honesty and perseverance. She wasn't wealthy or well-connected, but she had stood up for what was right. And in doing so, she had inspired countless others to do the same. Back inside the courthouse, the fallout from the trial continued to unfold. Investigators combed through Richard's financial records, uncovering a web of questionable transactions and unethical practices that extended far beyond the inheritance dispute. It turned out that Richard had been using his sister's estate to fund personal ventures, siphoning off large sums of money without anyone noticing. The revelation shocked even those who had doubted Emily's claims, further tarnishing Richard's reputation. In the days that followed, the town buzzed with gossip and speculation. Friends and colleagues who had once praised Richard now distanced themselves from him, embarrassed to be associated with someone accused of such blatant dishonesty. Business partners cut ties, fearing his actions might reflect poorly on them. Even his own family grew cold toward him, their loyalty shattered by his betrayal. Richard, who had always thrived on admiration and respect, found himself isolated and alone, a shadow of the man he used to be. For Emily, the aftermath of the trial brought both challenges and opportunities. While she was relieved to finally have closure, she also knew that rebuilding her life wouldn't be easy. The inheritance she received wasn't just a financial windfall. It was a responsibility, a chance to carry forward her mother's legacy in a meaningful way. She decided to use part of the money to support local charities and community programs, fulfilling her mother's wish to give back to those in need. Another portion went toward funding scholarships for students pursuing careers in fields her mother had cared deeply about, ensuring that her impact would continue for generations to come. But perhaps the most important change came within Emily herself. The trial had forced her to confront fears and insecurities she hadn't realized she carried. Standing up to her uncle had taught her the value of speaking her truth, no matter how intimidating the circumstances might seem. She emerged from the experience stronger, more resilient, and determined to live her life with purpose and integrity. 1. Evening. As she sat alone in her small apartment, Emily pulled out the video recording of her mother one last time. Watching it again brought tears to her eyes, but they weren't tears of sadness this time. They were tears of gratitude. Her mother's voice echoed softly in the background, filled with love and wisdom. "Take care of yourself, sweetheart," she said near the end of the recording. "And remember, no matter what happens, always stand up for what's right." Emily smiled through her tears, feeling a deep sense of peace wash over her. She had done exactly that. She had stood up for what was right, not just for herself, but for her mother and everyone else affected by Richard's greed. And though the road ahead wouldn't always be easy, she knew she was ready to face whatever challenges lay in store. After all, she had already proven that she was capable of overcoming the impossible. The days following the trial were a whirlwind of activity for Emily. The verdict had not only validated her claims but also thrust her into the spotlight, making her an unexpected symbol of courage and resilience in the small town. Reporters continued to seek her out, eager to hear more about her journey and how she managed to take on one of the most influential men in the community. While Emily appreciated the support, she found herself overwhelmed by the constant attention. It wasn't fame or recognition she craved, it was peace, closure, and the chance to honor her mother's memory in a way that truly mattered. One morning, as she sat at her kitchen table sipping coffee, Emily flipped through the local newspaper. Her face stared back at her from the front page, accompanied by headlines like, "Courageous Daughter Exposes Family Betrayal," and "How One Woman Stood Up to Greed." She sighed, folding the paper neatly and setting it aside. The articles praised her bravery, but they couldn't capture the emotional toll the trial had taken on her. Nights were still restless, filled with dreams of confrontations with Richard and memories of her mother. Despite the victory, healing would take time. Meanwhile, Richard's world continued to unravel. The investigation into his financial dealings revealed even more troubling details. He had not only manipulated his sister's estate but also engaged in shady business practices that exploited loopholes and harmed unsuspecting clients. Lawsuits began piling up against him, filed by former partners, employees, and charities who felt betrayed by his actions. His once flourishing empire started to crumble under the weight of legal battles and mounting debt. Friends turned their backs and acquaintances whispered behind closed doors about the man who had fallen from grace. But perhaps the hardest blow came from within his own family. Richard's siblings, Emily's aunt and uncle, publicly condemned his behavior, calling it a betrayal of everything their late sister had stood for. They issued statements expressing their disappointment and announcing plans to distance themselves from him entirely. Even his wife, who had always stood by his side, reportedly moved out, taking their children with her. Isolated and disgraced, Richard retreated from public life, rarely seen outside his home. For Emily, watching her uncle's downfall was bittersweet. On one hand, she felt vindicated knowing that justice had been served. On the other hand, she couldn't shake the sorrow of seeing a family member reduced to such a state. Her mother had loved Richard despite his flaws, and Emily knew her mother would have wanted reconciliation rather than revenge. Still, she reminded herself that Richard's choices, not hers, had led him down this path. Forgiveness might come someday, but it wouldn't be easy. As the dust settled, Emily focused on putting her inheritance to good use. She met with representatives from several charities her mother had supported over the years, discussing ways to maximize the impact of her donations. One organization provided scholarships for underprivileged students, while another offered housing assistance to families in need. Emily threw herself into these projects, finding solace in the knowledge that her efforts could make a real difference. Each meeting, each decision, brought her closer to fulfilling her mother's wishes and further away from the pain of the past. Yet amidst all the planning and organizing, Emily made time for herself too. For years, she had put others' needs ahead of her own, sacrificing personal happiness for survival. Now she realized she deserved better. She enrolled in art classes, a passion she had abandoned after her mother's death, and rediscovered the joy of painting. The colors seemed brighter now, the brushstrokes freer, as if creating something beautiful helped heal old wounds. She also reconnected with old friends, people who had drifted away during her struggles but welcomed her back with open arms. One evening, as she painted a sunset overlooking the lake near her childhood home, Emily felt a sense of calm she hadn't experienced in years. The scene reminded her of long walks she used to take with her mother, talking about hopes and dreams for the future. Those conversations had shaped her, instilling values of kindness, integrity, and perseverance. As she added the final touches to her painting, she whispered softly, "I hope I'm making you proud, Mom." Word of Emily's charitable work spread, quickly earning her admiration and respect throughout the community. People admired not just her generosity but also her humility. She didn't seek applause or accolades. Instead, she quietly dedicated herself to uplifting others. Local leaders invited her to speak at events, sharing her story as an example of resilience and determination. At first, she hesitated, unsure if she was ready to relive the painful details of the trial. But eventually she agreed, realizing that her experiences might inspire others facing similar challenges. During one such event, Emily stood before a packed auditorium, her voice steady yet filled with emotion. "When I started this journey," she began, "I never imagined where it would lead. All I wanted was to uncover the truth and honor my mother's memory. Along the way, I learned that standing up for what's right isn't always easy. But it's always worth it. If my story can encourage even one person to fight for justice, then everything I've been through has been worthwhile." Her words resonated deeply with the audience, many of whom rose to their feet in applause. Some approached her afterward, sharing their own stories of struggle and triumph. Emily listened intently, offering words of encouragement and solidarity. In those moments, she realized that her journey wasn't just about her. It was about connecting with others, building bridges, and fostering hope. As weeks turned into months, Emily noticed subtle changes in her outlook on life. The anger and bitterness that had once consumed her began to fade, replaced by gratitude and purpose. She still missed her mother terribly, but the grief no longer felt suffocating. Instead, it became a gentle reminder of the love they had shared and the lessons her mother had taught her. Emily carried those lessons with her every day, letting them guide her decisions and shape her interactions with the world. One crisp autumn afternoon, as golden leaves swirled around her feet, Emily visited her mother's grave. She knelt beside the headstone, tracing the engraved letters with her fingers. "Hi, Mom," she said softly, smiling despite the lump in her throat. "I just wanted to tell you everything's okay now. I did what you asked. I fought for the truth and I honored your wishes. I hope you're proud of me. I miss you so much, but I know you're still with me in my heart and my memories and everything I do." Tears streamed down her cheeks, but they weren't tears of sadness anymore. They were tears of love, of gratitude, of acceptance. As she placed a bouquet of wildflowers on the grave and stood to leave, Emily felt lighter somehow, as if a great weight had finally lifted from her shoulders. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, she felt ready to face it. Whatever challenges lay in store, she knew she had the strength to overcome them. After all, she had already proven that even the smallest voice could ignite change, and that sometimes justice really did prevail. Months had passed since the trial, and life in the small town began to settle into a new rhythm. The shockwaves caused by Richard's downfall eventually subsided, replaced by quieter conversations about redemption, forgiveness, and second chances. For Emily, the days grew calmer, though the echoes of her journey lingered in everything she did. She continued to pour her energy into the charities her mother had cherished, finding fulfillment in helping others and building connections within the community. Her kindness and dedication earned her not just respect, but genuine affection from those around her. The changes in Emily were subtle, yet profound. Once shy and reserved, she now carried herself with quiet confidence, She no longer doubted her ability to stand up for what was right, even when faced with adversity. People often remarked on how much she resembled her mother, not just in appearance but in spirit. It was as if her mother's legacy lived on through her, inspiring everyone who crossed her path. Strangers became friends and acquaintances turned into mentors, guiding her as she navigated this new chapter of her life. One day, while attending a charity gala hosted by one of the organizations she supported, Emily found herself standing at the podium, addressing a room full of well-wishers. The event celebrated the launch of a scholarship fund named after her mother, a tribute that brought tears to Emily's eyes as she accepted the honor. "When I think about my mom," she said, her voice steady despite the emotion swelling inside her, "I remember her laughter, her generosity, and her unwavering belief in doing what's right. This scholarship isn't just about giving students an opportunity. It's about keeping her values alive." Her speech resonated deeply with the audience, many of whom rose to their feet in applause. Among them was Mrs. Harper, a retired teacher, who had been close to Emily's mother. After the event, she approached Emily with a warm smile. "Your mother would be so proud of you," she said, placing a hand on Emily's shoulder. "You've turned something painful into something beautiful." Emily nodded, grateful for the kind words. "It hasn't been easy," she admitted, "but I think Mom taught me that challenges are meant to shape us, not break us. I'm just trying to live the way she would have wanted." As winter approached, Emily decided to take a step back from the constant whirlwind of public appearances and focus more on her personal growth. She rented a cozy cabin near the woods, a place where she could escape the noise and reflect on her journey. Surrounded by towering trees and crisp air, she spent hours writing in a journal, capturing her thoughts and emotions in ink. Writing became therapeutic, allowing her to process the events of the past year and envision what lay ahead. During one particularly snowy afternoon, Emily bundled up and took a long walk through the forest. The world felt still and peaceful, untouched by the chaos of human lives. As she trudged through the snow, she thought about Richard. She hadn't seen or heard from him since the trial, though rumors occasionally surfaced about his struggles. Some said he was working odd jobs to make ends meet. Others claimed he had left town altogether. While part of her pitied him, another part knew that reconciliation wasn't possible. Not yet, anyway. Forgiveness was a process, and it required time. Back at the cabin, Emily lit a fire and curled up on the couch with a cup of hot cocoa. She pulled out her phone and scrolled through photos of her mother, smiling at memories of happier times. One picture stood out, a candid shot of her mother laughing during a summer picnic, sunlight dancing in her eyes. Emily stared at it for a long moment, then whispered, "Thank you, Mom, for everything." That night, as she drifted off to sleep, Emily dreamed of her mother. In the dream, they were sitting together under a starry sky, talking about the future. Her mother's voice was soft but clear. "You've done well, sweetheart," she said. "I'm so proud of you." When Emily woke the next morning, the sense of peace stayed with her, lingering like the warmth of the sun on a cold day. Spring arrived, bringing with it a renewed sense of hope and possibility. Emily returned to town, ready to embrace whatever came next. She reconnected with old friends, explored new hobbies, and even considered going back to school to pursue a degree in social work. Helping others had become her passion, and she wanted to do it professionally. With each passing day, she felt more grounded, more whole. Richard, meanwhile, remained largely absent from public life. Rumors suggested he had moved to a neighboring city, living quietly and working manual labor jobs to support himself. Though some people expressed sympathy for his fall from grace, most agreed that his actions had consequences, and he needed to face them. Occasionally, Emily wondered if he regretted his choices, or if he understood the harm he had caused. She didn't know, and perhaps she never would. One sunny afternoon, as Emily strolled through the park, she noticed a familiar figure sitting on a bench. At first she hesitated, unsure whether to approach, but curiosity got the better of her and she slowly made her way over. It was Richard. He looked older, thinner, and far less imposing than she remembered. His head was bowed, and he seemed lost in thought. "Uncle Richard?" Emily said softly, her voice tentative. He looked up, startled, then sighed heavily. "Emily," he replied, his tone weary but not hostile. I wasn't sure you'd want to talk to me." She sat down beside him, leaving a respectful distance between them. "To be honest, I wasn't sure either," she admitted. "But ignoring the past won't fix anything. I guess I just wanted to see how you're doing." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Richard shook his head, his eyes filled with regret. "I messed up, Emily. I messed up big time. I let greed blind me, and I hurt people I cared about, including you. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I need you to know that I'm sorry." Emily studied him carefully, searching for sincerity in his words. Finally, she nodded. "I believe you," she said simply. "And maybe someday I'll be able to forgive you. But we both have a lot of healing to do before we get there." Richard nodded, tears glistening in his eyes. "Thank you for saying that. It means more than you know." They parted ways shortly after, each carrying the weight of their shared history, but also the glimmer of hope for reconciliation. Emily walked away feeling lighter, as if a door she had kept closed for too long had finally cracked open. In the months that followed, Emily continued to thrive. She enrolled in college, dove deeper into her charitable work, and built a life rooted in purpose and joy. Challenges still arose, but she faced them with resilience and grace, knowing she had already overcome the impossible. And as she stood on the cusp of a brighter future, Emily couldn't help but smile. Her journey had been long and difficult, but it had also been transformative. She had fought for justice, honored her mother's memory, and found strength she never knew she possessed. Most importantly, she had learned that even in the darkest moments, light can shine through if you're brave enough to let it.